So this is a data analysis question based upon an experiment that they're giving us some details about here. So let's break the question down before we have a go at answering it. So it says the fungus yeast contains the enzyme catalase. So again, we can make some assumptions about this enzyme, even though we've not really heard of this enzyme before. We know lots about enzymes. So what do we know about enzymes? What can we assume about catalase? So it tells us here that catalase speeds up the decomposition of hydrogen peroxide, a toxic metallic product, to oxygen and water. So, decomposition. Do we understand what decomposition is? I know we understand it in a biological term, but this is talking about a chemical, hydrogen peroxide. So do we understand what decomposition means in a chemical sense? And we've got the equation here for this reaction. So hydrogen peroxide, it's H2O2, being converted into water and oxygen, and this is a balanced equation here. So 2 moles of hydrogen peroxide are being converted into 2 moles of water and 1 mole of oxygen. So this is a data analysis question. Obviously we've had to conduct an experiment to measure the rate of this reaction. So if we were going to measure the rate of a reaction, how could we measure the rate of that? There are 2 different ways. So make a note of those up here, measuring the rate of a reaction. So if we wanted to measure how fast the hydrogen peroxide was being converted into these products. Okay, so the information goes on to tell us that a student decided to investigate the activity of this enzyme catalase using the apparatus shown in figure 1. So here's the equipment here. You can see that there's a test tube that's been secured using a clamp stand. And there's a tube that's being directed up into this graduated cylinder, which is inverted. It's upside down in a tub of water here. So it tells us that the total volume of gas collected was recorded every 20 seconds. So there's some important information here. So the total volume of gas collected. What is that gas? So using the information that you've already been given in the question, you know what gas it is, and every 20 seconds. So we understand what the student is doing here. So here's our setup: 10 cubic centimetres of 5% hydrogen peroxide and yeast in the test tube. So first of all, that yeast there, why have we put yeast in here with the hydrogen peroxide? Based on the information that you've already been told, you should understand that. There's a scale here on the side of the cylinder. So what's this for? What's this part of the cylinder representing? And what are these bubbles representing here? Now, from this setup and the information that we've been given already, we should be able to start making some assumptions here about the practical method. So for any practical that we talk about, we should always try to identify the variables that have been used. So first of all, what's the independent variable? So the independent variable, if you remember, I choose the values of this independent variable, as opposed to the dependent variable, which is the variable that you measure. So for this investigation, what's the independent variable and what's the dependent variable? What have you chosen the values of, and what are you measuring and recording? And for each of those, you should give a unit. So here's the results of the experiment that this student has conducted. And first of all, we can see that the main dark black line here is representing the results that the student has gained. But then we've got this additional dotted line here. what does that additional dotted line that's being drawn up from 0 there, what does that represent? You should know that. As the reaction progresses, we can see as time moves on, the reaction starts to produce less and less oxygen until we reach a point here where the volume of oxygen starts to plateau, and we get a constant volume regardless of how that time is progressing there. Now, something else that I want you to consider is the idea of repeats. So for any experiment, you should always aim to repeat your experiment as many times as need be, because repeats, if you remember, make your results reliable. Now, taking into account we've already decided what our independent and our dependent variables are, they never change. When we repeat our experiment, we also need to consider any variables that we are controlling. So what controlled variables would you have in this experiment as you make some replicate results? So these are all of the things that we should consider when thinking about the design of an experiment and when we attempt to look at and read and answer a data analysis question.